Let's talk about Jacob Markstrom here today. Not just because he was amazing last night, and I will say that I did not watch the game last night. I was doing Richmond Sockeyes PJHL Junior B play-by-play hockey, so I didn't actually get my eyes on any of the Vancouver Canucks game as it happened, but I can read numbers, I can understand what happened, and look at what other people have had to say. We're not talking about just Jacob Markstrom and his performance last night. Let's talk about him as a whole and the whole situation moving forward, because there's one really big word that kind of does sum up the entire conundrum and the whole weird situation we have right now with Jacob Markstrom that we do have to consider going into the long term, and that one word is Seattle. But before we get into any of that, let's talk about Jacob Markstrom from last night. As I said, I didn't watch the game. If you listened to me commentating live PJHL hockey, we did go to double overtime yesterday, and that would have been really cool. I don't think anybody on this YouTube channel actually listens to me play-by-play commentate, but because of that, I did not watch the game. But I did come back and leave the arena yesterday with a really weird idea in my head. Because the moment I stepped out of the arena, it was a 0-0 game looking at the Sportsnet app, and I was like, okay, what the heck is going on? It's 0-0 going into overtime. This hasn't happened for the Vancouver Canucks in, ever, right? I have no idea when the last time this happened off the top of my head. And then all of a sudden I'm walking home and I get a notification. Elias Pettersson scores 40 seconds into the overtime period. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, it had to have been Petey. Yes, that's awesome. And it had to have been 40 seconds into the overtime. How poetic is that? In fact, if you want to get really, really poetic on how the Vancouver Canucks were able to win yesterday, take a look at this. It's actually pretty good right here. Elias Pettersson scored on the 69th shot of the game with 4:20 left in overtime. And if it doesn't get as poetic and as memey as that, then I don't know what will. But Jacob Markstrom ultimately gets the W here, and it comes on a night where he has a total of 43 saves, and that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. If you take a look at the Canucks record books, the most saves in a shutout in Vancouver Canucks history was 45. Kirk McLean, December 4th, 1991, against the Montreal Canadiens. That was a long time ago, but taking a look at what actually happened in that night right here, let's take a look at Kid Vibes' comment here on Reddit. McLean in Montreal, he is 17-8-3 with a .261 goals against average, and after stopping 45 shots in a 3-0 victory over the Habs, was given a standing ovation by the fans at the Montreal Forum. That, of course, was the best goaltending performance by Vancouver Canuck goaltending players throughout their history in a shutout, but Jacob Markstrom was tied with Corey Schneider, who, on March 28th, 2012, against the Avalanche, also had 43 saves in a shutout for the most saves. So, taking a look at this, it's pretty interesting to see where Markstrom stacks up against the best of all time. Let's take a look at a few other things here, though. This is from Ian McIntyre's Sportsnet article, where he wrote about Jacob Markstrom and the win in general. I really like how he started off this article. Take a look at this first sentence over here. With his mother in the stands and an angel on his shoulder, Jacob Markstrom played Thursday one of the greatest games in net in Vancouver Canucks history. Obviously, Angel referring to his father, rest in peace, Mr. Markstrom. Jacob Markstrom actually has a Papa graphic put on the back of his mask in tribute to his father, of course. His mother was in the stands here, and Markstrom, after coming back from that leave, started out back in one of his first games in the NHL and pulled that off. So Ian McIntyre did a really good job at just portraying everything into one small little sentence, and how beautiful that one sentence is. I think it's amazing. And Markstrom, in general, played a game that saved the Canucks from playing a quote-unquote bad game. Because again, I didn't see any of it, but I did watch the highlights. I did see a lot of the notable moments as they were posted online. A lot of people said this on Twitter, and I think it's a really interesting perspective to bring up. The Vancouver Canucks ultimately won, yes, but the Canucks in general didn't play a good game. This was a game that a lot of people said the Hurricanes could have honestly scored 3 or 4. And if that's the case, then the Canucks would have lost this one 3 or 4-0. And if the Canucks did indeed lose this game 3 or 4-0, because they didn't score anything until the overtime, this would have been labeled a bad game. It would have been labeled a game where they gave up really good chances for the other team. This would have been a game where they needed to tighten down defensively. This would have been a game where they couldn't get the offense going. This was a bad game in general if you don't take into account Jacob Markstrom and his amazing performance. Markstrom was the reason this went to overtime, and Markstrom really did fight to get that win. So the Canucks as a whole are in a weird spot where they just got 2 points out of this game. They probably didn't deserve it, but it came off of the backs of one of the best goaltending performances in the club's history. So now, after that, let's talk about what's coming over later with Jacob Markstrom and the Vancouver Canucks, because Jim Benning did come out and he did say earlier that the plan right now is to keep Jacob Markstrom. Now that's, in general, a pretty nice thing to hear, especially about your starting goalie, the guy who's been really gosh darn good over the past calendar year. However, Seattle does exist, and the whole existence of Seattle is going to put the Vancouver Canucks in a weird spot when dealing with their goaltenders, because if you ask a lot of Canucks fans, a very commonly shared belief is that, yes, the Canucks would have to give up a Jacob Markstrom to make sure they keep a guy like Thatcher Demko in the system when the Seattle team does come into fruition and when the expansion draft does happen. We did see when Vegas came in, a whole bunch of teams trading away players and picks to Vegas to guarantee that Vegas not choose some of their guys that they would leave unprotected, because in fact there are just so many guys that teams would just want to protect. So, in general, I'm not necessarily too sure what exactly is going to play out if the Canucks do, in fact, keep Markstrom. The guy is in a contract year, and the guy does need security for the long term, because that's important, right? So, overall, if the Canucks do indeed sign Jacob Markstrom and they keep him, I would be happy with that. I like Jacob Markstrom, but to me, the planning for the long-term future, especially with Seattle coming into the mix, it's not necessarily something that I can sit here and say I'm really confident in, because I don't know Jacob Markstrom's long-term future with the Canucks. Thatcher Demko is supposed to be, in theory, he's going to be the guy who takes us into the promised land, and he will be the long-term starter for the Canucks. Markstrom is really good, and he is 29, but he needs a contract, and Seattle is coming in a few years, so I'm not necessarily too sure on the security front of that, whether or not Markstrom will be a Canuck by the time Seattle is in the league. But if it is able to happen, then okay, that's cool, just please don't give up another first, Jim Benning. And I'm not one to sit here and pretend like I'm super smart about the Seattle thing either. I just know that there will be some moves that need to be made, and somebody will have to go over to that team. Whether or not that's the goalie or somebody else, I'm not sure. But the Canucks will have to protect some of their players, but what we do know is that some of their players are already protected just by the nature of their contracts. Guys like Louis Eriksson, I believe, will be in that boat because he does have a no-trade clause. And he will have a modified no-trade clause too, or does he expire before then? I'm not really too sure. You see, I'm not the guy to talk about this a lot because I'm not necessarily the most informed, but if you do have the information, please leave that in the comments below. I would love to read it, love to understand what's actually going on here, because it is a concern, and I know that for sure. So, Jacob Markstrom has been a beast, but the long-term future is not necessarily there, but, of course, just taking a look at everything that's gone down now, Markstrom, what an amazing, amazing performance yesterday. That was truly magnificent. Hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.